Don't move.
No. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for those kind words. I've never been referred to as a treasure before, but I'll take it. I want to thank my friend Judy Van Houten and Michael Gordon and everybody else for inviting me to address this august group. As Michael was saying, it's just wonderful to see you walk in, and I say to myself, I know that person, I know that person, I know her, I know him. And once in a while I have a little difficulty with a name, but basically I feel like we're all a wonderful UVM family. Michael was kind enough to mention my 50 years of teaching at UVM, and well, I'm sure you all agree. Time just flies by so quickly, and now even being retired supposedly for 4 or 5 years, then you say to yourself, how did that add up so quickly? But I have many, many close friends among you, and some of them are Kevin McKenna and David Grace, Dennis Mahoney and Tim Murad and many others. But when we get together, sometimes we do drink beer, you know, and meet at a pub and brewery downstairs. You can join us sometime if you wish. But anyhow, when we get done with our talk and discussion of former times, we always say at the end, we've had a good run. And I have the feeling that all of you would agree with that statement, that for us who are retired, we've had a good run. I think the university has been good to us. I think we have been good to the university. And so I think we have all enjoyed our time together. And I think it's great that this organization, I guess it's called the Retired Faculty and Administrators Organization, organizes this annual lunch. When Judy contacted me on January 29, 2026 about the honor of being allowed or able to talk to you today, I always have a hard time deciding what I should talk about. Well, at the time when Judith's letter of invitation arrived, I happened to be finishing a paper on Taylor Swift. And, you know, you have no idea how much I enjoyed working on that paper. I mean, the reason is I have a wonderful, beautiful grandniece who is a Swiftie. And I thought Uncle Wolfgang ought to maybe write a paper that I could send to her. And so, well, then I thought, well, maybe talking about Love is a Game, Gonna Play is the title of it. And I thought maybe that isn't so appropriate for us senior citizens. So, but at the same time, I was finishing a book on what I'm going to talk about today, proverbial democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people. I wrote this book in a way, it sounds maybe drippy, but in a way as a birthday present to my adopted motherland, meaning the United States. And I thought, when I started working on this, it could be a little birthday present I could give to the country in which I have enjoyed living and working. And so 7, 8 days ago, the book actually appeared in print, so I brought it. And what you're going to get today then is a reduction of what I have to say in this study. Many of my studies on Proverbs have dealt with the question, where does a particular expression come from? And let me assure you, once you ask that question about any proverb or sententious remark or whatever, you really have a major research project. And the linguists among us, as you all know, once you get, well, let's say further back than the 16th, 15th century, you better have your Latin ready. And Barbara, that's for you, right? maybe Greek even better. But anyhow, so today what this little talk is really about is kind of a history of this proverbial triad that we hear so often and that we know so well. And so it is a little bit of a semi-quincentennial present that I thought would be fun to write. My dear wife told me I should read the end of my preface to you of this little book. And so I will, being the good husband that I am, I will read it to you. So anyhow, you already know I'm going to talk about the history. I am not an expert on what democracy is, by the way, but we're talking about this particular sentence. So anyhow, as I mentioned to you, I wrote this book as a thankful present to the United States on its 250th birthday. So at the end, the last paragraph, I say, in 1960, at the age of 16, I came to the United States on my own as a youthful immigrant from Germany. In due time, as you know, I became a professor of German and folklore at the University of Vermont, where I taught for 50 years and pursued my studies. Some of my books deal with the proverbial rhetoric of major American politicians. And it is with just much joy that I look back on my comprehensive dictionary of American proverbs, a considerable accomplishment and honor for a so-called German American. As such, my studies on the nature and politics of American proverbs have meant the world to me, and it is with much excitement that I present this study about proverbial democracy with thankfulness for my scholarly life as a naturalized citizen of the United States. I imagine you know what I'm getting at with that last sentence. I thoroughly enjoyed writing it, by the way. Okay, you already thought of Lincoln, of course, so I will begin my little talk with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's closing remarks of his short yet famous Gettysburg Address of November 19, 1863, have become proverbial as government of the people, by the people, for the people. Yet, as is the case with some of the other famous utterances by our admired President Lincoln, he relied on the wisdom and insights of others to create his memorable phrase that provides the most succinct definition of democracy. I just refresh your memory. A house divided against itself cannot stand is, of course, from the Bible, Mark 3:25. Let us have faith that right makes might. That famous talk he gave in New York in 1860 is a proverb from the 14th century. Don't swap horses in the middle of the stream that he used on June 9, 1864, when he was asked to run again. I have traced back to as early as 1834. In any case, let us trace the history of the proverb, government of the people, by the people, for the people, from its beginnings to before Lincoln. Then let's look at Lincoln's unique formulation turned from a quotable definition of democracy to a generally accepted democratic proverb. And in a third step, let us consider how it has been employed in various political contexts right up to our present time. The earliest statement is contained in an epistolary description of the new American government and society for a British friend that Thomas Cooper includes in his book entitled Some Information Respecting America from 1794. He writes, "There is little fault to find with the government of America, either in principle or practice. We have very few taxes to pay, we have no animosities about religion, we have few respecting political men or political measures. The government is the government of the people, for the people." Okay, so that is the earliest reference that I have found that at least comes maybe close to what we eventually have. This particular formulation gained no currency in the public sphere, but serves as an indication that the underlying idea of the phrase is in the air already in the late 18th century. This can be seen some 30 years later from a very, very famous speech that Daniel Webster gave, where he defined, so to speak, American government, and which he included in his famous speech in the Senate of January 26, 1830. Webster writes, "It is the people's constitution, the people's government, made for the people, made by the people, and answerable to the people. The people of the United States have declared that this Constitution shall be the supreme law." All rings clear now, doesn't it? We must either admit the proposition or dispute their authority. The states are unquestionably sovereign, so far as their sovereignty is not affected by this supreme law, meaning the Constitution. This is an extremely important argument for the singleness of the nation that is governed by laws that go beyond those of individual states. His argument for a national people of government made for the people, made by the people, and answerable to the people is quite close to Lincoln's statement at the end of the Gettysburg Address some 30 years later. But it does not yet have the what I would call the proverbial ring in which Lincoln, the masterful rhetorical craftsman, was able to give it just a few years later. But on May 29, this is one of my greatest finds, but on May 29, 1850, the white abolitionist Theodore Parker found truly compelling words in his speech on slave power in America at a New England anti-slavery convention at Boston. Here he defines the American government in exactly the same way that Abraham Lincoln would do it 13 years later. But there is one considerable difference in that Parker includes the inclusive adjective all 3 times before the noun people, clearly signaling that he means to include the hopefully soon to be freed slaves of the nation as well. His remarks belong to the most impressive statements of that period in American history, and they certainly deserve to stand next to those of President Lincoln, whose important utterances could obtain wider currency. Of course, he was the president. It went all over the place, media and so on, due to his leadership position. This statement by Parker is truly remarkable. 1850, abolitionist clergyman, and here's what he wrote. "There is what I call the American idea. I so name it because it seems to me to lie at the basis of all our truly original, distinctive, and American institutions. It is itself a complex idea, composed of 3 subordinate, more simple ideas, namely, the idea that all men have unalienable rights, that in respect thereof, all men are created equal," referring to the Declaration of Independence, of course, that government is to be established and sustained for the purpose of giving every person an opportunity for the enjoyment and development of all these unalienable rights. This idea demands a democracy. That is, now comes this definition, that is, a government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. Quite certainly, Lincoln was influenced by Theodore Parker's use of the triadic structure of this government definition. When Lincoln concluded his Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, with the claim that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth, he gave it the concise and perfect form in which it survives. but he can hardly be called the originator of his phrasal definition. But it was he who implanted it in the minds and worldview of his contemporaries and generations of Americans to come. Interestingly enough, Lincoln dropped out the inclusive word all, and that is exactly where the historical, cultural, social, and political problem arises with Lincoln's proverb. Did he even include the African American population in his thoughts when he spoke of a government of the people, by the people, for the people? I would think he did. After all, though, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, had not yet brought suffrage to the former slaves, and women's rights to vote was also not established yet, as you all know. Thus, the proverb appears as a somewhat privileged statement of white males, perhaps, with Theodore Parker's more liberal statement proving the exception to the rule. When I used to discuss this passage with my students, I always told them that, in defense of my hero Lincoln, that you have to realize that a president should not talk in extremes. Do you think President Trump is listening to this? In other words, we know that Lincoln had pamphlets of Theodore Parker's speeches and also a pamphlet of Webster. But I think at the time, in the middle of the Civil War, it was way too premature for him to make that extreme statement of all the people. So I have the feeling he consciously but regrettably dropped the all out. In any case, there is no doubt that Lincoln read and used, as I said, the speeches of Webster and Parker and so on. And we know that when Lincoln prepared his various speeches, he would gather material from many sources and spend days reading, listening, rephrasing, refocusing, and strengthening his arguments. These considerations led quite naturally to one of the most famous phrases attributed to Lincoln, as we all know, namely that included in the closing remarks of his short, 272 words, yet famous Gettysburg Address. Who memorized the Gettysburg Address in this group? Oh, look, there are quite a few. I think that unfortunately has dropped out of the curriculum of our schools. I still maintain that school children, although I probably shouldn't even be saying this, I hated it when I was a kid, but we always had to learn poems by heart in Germany, and then we had to get in front of the class and recite it, And sometimes we also memorized parodies of it. And I recall I had to get up there, and whatever the devil made me do it, I recited the parody, which was rather obscene. And that got me into deep problems. Well, the Gettysburg Address, of course, we all know. How do you think about fourscore? Do most people know what that score means? You do, I know that. But do our students know it? Fourscore? I don't know. Anyhow, wonderful start of the Gettysburg Address, of course. fourscore years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Again, I mean, if Lincoln were awake today, alive, he would, of course, have said that all people are created equal. Anyhow, as you know, it ends with that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. When Lincoln added at the very end that a democratic government shall not perish from the earth, he might well have had a passage from the Bible in mind. Proverbs 29:18 has, where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. But regarding the precise wording of government of the people, by the people, for the people, the phrase is indeed Lincoln's. Bi- and tripartite variants of it were in considerable oral and written circulation at his time. But if there was any direct influence, it most likely was, as I said, Daniel Webster, or even more obviously, Theodore Parker. Except for the word all, Parker's phrase is absolutely identical with that of Lincoln, and the latter can hardly be considered the originator of this triadic formulation. That does not mean, of course, that Lincoln did not popularize his version through his masterful Gettysburg Address, so it now has become a proverbial definition of a free and democratic government. In the precise wording of government of the people, by the people, for the people, this statement turned memorable quotation and eventually, having become a well-known proverb, belongs to Abraham Lincoln, no doubt about it. In all of his work for the steady improvement of the black race, Lincoln's contemporary and friend, and you know, Lincoln did once say, let Frederick Douglass into a reception at the White House, and he said, he's my friend. I would have liked to have been there. Anyhow, Lincoln's contemporary and friend, the former slave and subsequent abolitionist and socio-political reformer Frederick Douglass, never lost sight of his goal to fight for civil rights of all the people. Once Douglass learned of Lincoln's formulation in the Gettysburg Address, he too started using it in that precise wording in numerous speeches, thus in fact adding to its popularity, which resulted in its eventual proverbial status. In his major address on the sources of danger to the Republic, delivered on February 7, 1867, just, a few years after the Gettysburg Address, at St. Louis, he used it for the first time. Again, this is, I think, an incredible rhetorical masterpiece by a person who never went to school, completely self-taught. As far as Douglass's rhetorical prowess is concerned, I've said that in a couple of my studies, I put him definitely right next to Abraham Lincoln. Amazing, amazing person. And here he is. I am here to advocate a genuine democratic republic, to make this a republican form of government, purely a republic, a genuine republic. Make it a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and for all the people, each for all and all for each. You see, Douglass could say it. That's the point. Only 3-4 years after Lincoln. Wonderful. For all the people, each for all and all for each. And he goes on, blot out all discrimination against any person, theoretically or practically, and make it conform to the great truth laid down by the fathers. Keep no man from the ballot box or jury box or cartridge box because of his color. Exclude no woman from the ballot box because of her sex. Let the government of the country rest securely down upon the shoulders of the whole nation. Let there be no shoulder that does not bear up its proportion of the burden of the government. I think these statements ought to be repeated right now. What a statement, barely 2 years after the Civil War, by a black man. What a vision for a positive reconstruction of the nation, for all the people, each for all and all for each, without any discrimination by race or gender. The last words of this review of the 19th century appearances of Lincoln's proverb belongs to women's suffrage, of course, and social reformer Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who included the following remarks in her address of welcome to the International Council of Women on March 25, 1888 at Washington, D.C. there is a chance that Frederick Douglass, who was a great admirer of Katie Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, there's a great chance that Frederick Douglass, quite old already, but was in the audience. But you have to imagine, or I do at least, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, small stature like myself, a little bit more rotund than I, but a fireball just the same. And I would have liked to have been there. Look at what she does. She begins her speech and says, "The women from many lands have assembled at last to claim their rightful place as equal factors in the great movements of the 19th century. In the old world, they have governments and people. Here we have a government of the people, by the people, for the people." Then she makes that great break and says, "That is, we soon shall have, when that important half called women are enfranchised, and the laboring masses know how to use the power they possess." I mean, that must have gone down like wildfire, you know. We would have had to observe her up there making that uncommon break and then say, well, we'll soon have it, but maybe one of these days we have the 19th Amendment and ratification in 1920 and so on. This is indeed effective rhetoric, and I think I'll invite you to compare that to what we have now. Yeah. This is indeed effective rhetoric, quoting a well-known Lincoln phrase turned proverb in a most positive way, and then adding an unexpected twist to it that places it right in the middle of women's rights and the whole problem of voting women and the masses in general. Abraham Lincoln's proverbial definition of democratic government has established itself well, and it will be made use of in whatever way to comment on the positive and negative side of the American government. By the beginning of the 20th century, the proverb has lost its limited male orientation, and can in fact be understood as a piece of folk wisdom describing democratic principles where race and gender should not make a difference. On October 11, 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt made the following Thanksgiving proclamation, proudly quoting the words of Lincoln without having to name the former president. His fellow citizens knew very well whom he was quoting. And he said, "In no other place, in no other time, has the experiment of government of the people, by the people, for the people, been tried on so vast a scale as here in our own country in the opening years of the 20th century. Failure would not only be a dreadful thing for us, but a dreadful thing for all mankind, because it would mean loss of hope for all who believe in the power and righteousness of liberty." Some 30 years later, the American poet and renowned Lincoln biographer Carl Sandburg stepped forth with his epic poem, "The People Yes," 1936, and I would like to mention, you might enjoy reading that epic poem again. It is really about 210 pages long, where Lincoln describes our country by way of its language, its idioms, its slang. It's a great testament to our, let's say, American English language. Celebrating America as a country of immigrants, diversity, and nevertheless national unity. The impressive section on Abraham Lincoln, quoting freely from his works, includes the following lines. I kind of enjoyed these when I found them. He says, Lincoln with a question mark, Lincoln, "He was a mystery in smoke and flags, saying yes to the smoke, yes to the flags, yes to the paradoxes of democracy, yes to the hopes of government, of the people, by the people, for the people." Lincoln's words also reappeared in the mass media, of course, of the turbulent years of the first half of the 20th century, with its 2 world wars, prohibition, stock market crash, and so on. Both Winston Churchill and Harry S. Truman made repeated use of Abraham Lincoln's proverbial triad. 2 days after the end of World War II, Churchill rose on August 16, 1945, in the House of Commons to deliver his prophetic speech on the Iron Curtain begins to fall, that looked into the future of Europe, divided into East and West. With clear understanding of the political challenges that were facing Western Europe, he returned one more time to the proverbial triad that had served him so well before, several times actually. Here's Churchill. We must know where we stand, and we must make clear where we stand in these affairs of Eastern Europe, with Russia taking control. Our ideal is government of the people, by the people, for the people. The people being free without duress to express, by secret ballot without intimidation, their deep-seated wish to the form and conditions of the government under which they are to live. On the American side of the struggle of World War II and its aftermath, it was Harry Truman who repeatedly drew on Lincoln's wisdom to underscore the ideals of democratic government. On March 28, 1951, challenging the other side to open and forthcoming conversations, he stated, "Our government is government of the people, for the people, by the people. And we are trying to make it work as best we can." That's typical Truman, by the way. I've worked very hard on this. What we want to do is to convince the people behind the Iron Curtain that we do not, under any circumstances, want to control or tell them what to do. Raise the curtain and let us see how they do it. One is reminded, obviously, of President Ronald Reagan's remarks some 40 years later on June 12, 1987, at the Berlin Wall. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. President John F. Kennedy, on October 31st, 1960, also relied on the proverbial triad in his speech of October 31, 1960. I like the way he did this. Notice, "I believe in not a labor government, not a farmer's government, not a government of one section of the country or another, but a government of, by, and for the people." As you would expect, presidential candidates continue to be aware of the emotional power of Lincoln's democratic proverb that resonates so well in the minds of us Americans. When Barack Obama stopped at Philadelphia and Baltimore on January 7, 2009, on the way to his historic inauguration as the first African-American president of the United States on January 20th, he made the following statement. President Obama, I think, is pretty much the last president we've had who really did have rhetorical power. When I wrote my book on Obama, I almost moved to tears at times, how he would express something that we so very much need right now, hope, hope. And then his book, The Audacity of Hope, as you all know. But here's what he said. Remember, he stopped in Philadelphia and in Baltimore. "The early patriots were willing to put all they were and all they had on the line, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, for a set of ideals that continue to light the world. That we are equal, that our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness come not from our laws, but from our Maker, and that government of, by, and for the people can endure. It was these ideals that led us to declare independence and craft our Constitution, producing documents that were imperfect but had within them, like our nation itself, the capacity to be made more perfect." And we all know that phrase about more perfect. That is eloquent proverbial rhetoric by a sincere, courageous, and admired person. And how about now? Our own Bernie Sanders wrote in his book, The American Revolution, 2016, very much worthwhile reading, by the way, The American Revolution. The American people have sought to expand democracy and make it more inclusive. To quote Lincoln at Gettysburg, our goal has been to create a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Then President Joe Biden, on November 2nd, 2022, made this statement in the form of a 3-line soundbite. From the beginning, nothing has been guaranteed about democracy in America. Every generation has had to defend it, protect it, preserve it, choose it. For that's what democracy is. It's a choice. I like that. It's a choice. That's a choice we make as citizens. A decision of the people, by the people, and for the people. But not to leave President Trump out, he concluded his recent message on the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address on November 19, 2025 with, "We will always remember our fallen heroes, cherish our freedom, honor our heritage, and forever uphold that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." So before I conclude, what I've shown you is this minute part of my longer study, but I wanted to show you how presidents have dealt, once Lincoln used it, have dealt with the phrase. But anyhow, the last 2-3 comments, where's the depth of these political messages with the proverbial triad appearing, I think I could maybe say that, somewhat as a cliched phrase? That's of course a danger. That, we are going to hear so much about all men are created equal of the Declaration in the next few weeks, that then these amazingly important statements become cliches. So we have to be careful that we use them in an appropriate way by surrounding them with rhetoric that has some depth to it. What has become of the rhetorical prowess of people like Daniel Webster, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, Churchill, Truman, Obama, and others? These are clearly different times, I agree, for presidential candidates and future presidents, when every word is recorded and together with pictures is broadcast instantly around the world. That being the case, it behooves modern presidents to pay close attention to their rhetoric, once again, as their predecessors most assuredly practiced it. The words and phrases of spontaneous utterances, as well as of formal addresses or speeches, need to be chosen with considerable care, and a good dose of pride in the English language ought to be added to it. With such proper respect for the power of words, modern presidents as well can formulate statements that will enter the annals of American political and social history. In the meantime, Americans have Abraham Lincoln's proverb, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people," to guide them in their attempt to make democracy work. It certainly is a piece of wisdom that might lead humanity, with the assistance of the United Nations, to a free and democratic world. Thank you. I have one small announcement yet. Some of you probably knew Al Rosa, our English professor colleague who passed away about maybe 6-7 months ago. Anyhow, Al Rosa and Paul Eschholz, who created the New England Press, gave me the wonderful opportunity, starting in 1989, to publish a series of what I call my fun books, the only ones that ever had any success. It's true, the first one was called, some of you might know it, was called Talk Less and Say More, Vermont Proverbs, you might have one. That sold over 10,000 copies. The books are right now sell 93, 101. I will go not much further than that. Anyhow, before Al died, he called me and he said, you know, Wolfgang, we're closing down our storage room. The press closed some 15 years ago. And we still have a few boxes of books that, you know, will be shredded. He says, do you want them? And I said, yeah, I'll take them. And so now I'm peddling them and giving them away. There are more there, so take 2 or 3 of them if you'd like. But they're a lot of fun. It's basically poking fun of what I do, you know, studying Proverbs. Okay, so much. It's free. Oh, Pat, yeah.
Wolfgang, first, thanks for talking to us. Edifying and inspirational.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thinking about this concept of people, I have a sense that in a way it's a modern term. I guess you would say it's an invention of the Enlightenment, the term people. But I wonder if it is exceptional in terms of the way in which we use the term, as to the way in which it might be understood elsewhere.
You mean the term people?
What I'm thinking about is, say, the use of the term people in France.
Yeah.
Where the figures such as Jules Michelet wrote a book called The People.
Yeah.
And I don't think he conceived of that concept as the egalitarian ideal, the sort that you're talking about, but rather the people who are oppressed and need to rise up.
Yeah. I think maybe in our American parlance, Pat, people, again, being a 250-year-old democracy, I think, in a way, and I look at it from a German point of view as well. I think people does have a little bit of a different sense to it in our country. Yeah, I agree. A little bit more inclusive, I think, than it would be in the German language. Yes, and probably in French as well. Yeah.
You can move around if you wish.
Oh. Yeah. I wish I could have given you a little bit more the use of the triad in the media, you know, in literature. But I thought for this talk I would just simply choose, and I left quite a few of the presidents out. You know, FDR used it as well, but I didn't think you wanted to stay that long.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Very enlightening.
Thank you.
So you made it sound as though becoming a cliche was a negative thing. Isn't it true that lots of proverbs become cliche?
Yeah.
Isn't that what, if you're coming up with a good proverb, isn't that what your hope is?
Yeah.
That it becomes so accepted it becomes a cliche.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that comment, and you're right on. You know, it's almost like you can't have it both ways. You know, you can't have something become a proverb and then argue it's a cliche. I think the issue is how you use any proverb. If you use it in a context where it really hits the nail on the head and proves a point and closes an argument, then it wouldn't be a cliche. But if you just kind of throw it out nonchalantly, kind of like repeating it, and I even saying, there he goes again with that same damn proverb, you know, then it would be a cliche, right? So the proof is of the pudding, you know, it depends how you use it. And I think for a long time, people used to think that proverbs always have to be somewhat didactic, that only our grandparents used them to teach us what to do and so on. But what you really have is, I'll use three fancy words just for fun. You have polyfunctionality. In other words, also the proverbial triad we talked about today can be used in with different functions. Polysemanticity with slight difference in meanings, and polysituativity in different contexts or situations. And that's, if you're wondering why I've been doing this for several decades, the fascination of seeing how proverbs or quotations, you know, lines from folk songs, lines from literature, how they are used. You know, we all use "all's well that ends well," and we know that Shakespeare used it. wasn't his original anyhow, but he used it. But again, it depends how you use it, in what context, and with what purpose. So, but if not used in a little bit of a, but by the way, that can include humor, of course, and irony and fun. And then there's that whole field about, this is a term that I coined once upon a time, anti-proverbs. And that's what that little book is about, that you can pick up, that you take any proverb and you change a word or two, and it becomes something wonderfully funny or obscene or whatever you wish. So, yeah. But I appreciate the idea about the cliche. It was right on. Yeah, if it becomes, well, let's just take that last sentence, the last thing I quoted. If a president simply uses it because you're giving a speech in memory of then there's no depth to it. You have to say a little bit more than that. You know, and so. But I really wanted to save Lincoln, you know. I think I made that clear, right? The only way that Lincoln can claim to be the originator of the triad is that he was the first to drop the all out. Otherwise, I think Theodore Parker deserves the credit. You know, but Theodore Parker was well known. I mean, he was an abolitionist in Boston, gave many, many speeches. The library has 8 volumes of his works. But it's interesting, once you start looking at these, remember I started with that, house divided against itself cannot stand. Many of us think Lincoln coined that, you know, but if you have one more minute, I have a nice story about that proverb. Willy Brandt, the German chancellor, was invited to give a memorial lecture in Springfield, Illinois in the 1950s. And he prepared himself for that, and he came across Lincoln's use of a house divided against itself cannot stand. And he gave his speech, and then many years later, we come to 1989, and the the Berlin Wall came down that I mentioned, and Willy Brandt gave a lot of talks. And what I need to tell you is that a house divided against itself is from the Bible, but it became quite proverbial in the English language, but not in Martin Luther's translation in German. In other words, the proverb that we know did not exist in Germany prior. So here's Willy Brandt running around in Germany giving major addresses about reunification and uses the German translation, ein in sich gespaltenes Haus hat keinen Bestand. And because of the media and his influence, it is now a German proverb. Isn't that amazing? I dedicated a whole damn book to this. but I just, it's interesting to see how this happened. You know? I'll give you another example. Reagan. When Leonid Brezhnev died, one of the American journalists asked Reagan, well, now, Mr. President, Kevin, who's next? Andropov? Does Andropov come after Brezhnev? I think so. Anyhow, Mr. President, are you going to get along better now with the Soviet Union? And Reagan, as you know, only Reagan could, said, it takes two to tango. You know? Now, It Takes Two to Tango, you know, was the famous Pearl Bailey song from 1952, It Takes Two to Tango. A German journalist by the name of Theo Sommer, 2 days later, had a headline, Zum Tango gehören zwei. And now in German it has become proverbial. Now that shows you the power of the media, of course. You know, in some of my historical studies, it has taken at times centuries for a proverb to be translated, get back to you, Barbara, from Latin to some European languages, and so on and so on. But now, you know, the modern American proverbs, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, a picture's worth 1,000 words, shit happens. Now I did say the word I wanted to say. Anyhow, you'd be surprised. They already exist in French and German, but that was never possible before the internet and all the media. So it's fascinating to see how proverbial wisdom, let's just say, is spread. And you want to go home.
Thank you for a really inspirational presentation and a necessary one for this time. One might argue, just to follow a cliche question with taking it maybe a slightly different direction, that each one of these proverbs was used without attribution to its use before, or where that speaker obtained that information. So it might be viewed as being a form of plagiarism, which we try to keep our students from doing. What, in your mind, having studied this for your whole career, what's the essential element that takes a series of words or a couple of phrases and makes it a proverb as opposed to just another set of sentences?
Yeah, well, that is what I would say to the students nowadays is, if you are aware of the fact that you are quoting, let's say, something out of Shakespeare, well, list your source. But first of all, proverbs have no protection. Proverbs are common usage. Don't need to worry about that. So, in other words, even if you know all these wonderful American slogans we have, from the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and Gettysburg Address, all of that is common property. So there would be no rights to have to get. But things become tricky when you use, let's say, when you start using a sententious remark or a proverb in context, and you don't quote where you got that from, then it becomes a problem. But proverbs as such, there are no rights involved. So I don't have to ask for any permission to quote from, well, if I quote from a proverb dictionary, I give the source, of course. But otherwise, you can quote proverbs with, whichever way you want. Yeah. But I know nowadays that things can get involved. When I want to use a poem, just to give another example, if I want to use a poem in a book, I have to ask permission. And that gets to be very, very pricey, very quickly. And so there are certain, it's interesting that you asked this question. There are certain projects that I would not undertake anymore because I don't want to deal with having to get the permissions. It's just too complicated, too costly. Sometimes you can't even find out who has the rights. And our litigious society has gotten to the point now that publishers will say, unless you get the rights, you cannot use that poem. Or they might say, you may choose to use the poem, but you will only be allowed to use 4 lines. So I marvel at people who nowadays put out anthologies, because to do an anthology, you have to get all the rights. And that gets very difficult. So that gets us back to Taylor Swift. It really does fit. I'm lucky because Taylor Swift, who of course, as you well know, is a billionaire, she doesn't need my money. She has put on the internet 320 pages of her songs, and I can use them. So in my longish paper on her proverbial lyric, I didn't have to ask permission. But you know, it is still kind of fun. The article is coming out in about 4 weeks in Poland, and she was a big smashing success in her Era tour in Warsaw, and I have Polish friends and they wanted it. Anyhow, so if I had sent that manuscript to an American journal, I'm not so sure if they would have taken, I would have probably have to do something to make sure that I'm allowed to quote some of the songs. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, but also, you know, I once got called on the carpet for, I did this book on not FDR, Kennedy, I guess. All of a sudden, all my quotations out of the public papers of the presidents of the United States, they all of a sudden wanted me to get permission for all of that. And I said, these are the public papers of the United States presidents. I won that one, but still it became an argument.
Another question back?
Yes, I have a question for you. There is a saying in the Congo that you can avoid anything except death and taxes. Now, our president has figured out a way.
Wait a minute, I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
You can avoid anything except death and taxes. That's a common phrase you've heard for all my life. And so I'm wondering, since our president has figured out a way to avoid taxes, do you think he'll be able to avoid death too?
Well, I think I've kept you long enough. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang.